Good morning, Lighthouse. It's Ricky here. We're going to be continuing our series on women in the Bible, and this week we're going to be looking at the book of Esther. Before we dive right in, I just want to open this up in a word of prayer. God, thank you so much for giving us this day, giving us the book of Esther to kind of look at our own lives and see how you are at work in our lives each and every day. I pray that, Lord, you will bless this time. Would you bless my lips to speak your word, and that you would open the ears of the listeners to be able to hear your truth through your word. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So to give you a little background about what's going on in the book of Esther. So this is a number of years after the Babylonian exile, where the Babylonians had conquered the Israelites and exiled them into the nation of Babylon. They stayed there for a while, but then eventually they were conquered by the Persians. So in the book of Esther, it's actually during Persian rule. So the book of Esther opens up with the current king, Xerxes, hosting this huge banquet. And during the banquet, the current queen, Vashti, actually disobeys him in front of all of his guests. And this makes Xerxes pissed, really mad about this. And so he ends up firing Queen Vashti as the queen. So he's now looking for a new queen. So what he does is he goes throughout the land collecting young women against their will to be part of his harem. Well, one of these young girls is Esther. And Esther is a Jew. And she actually doesn't have parents, so she's an orphan. And so she's being raised by her cousin Mordecai. And during the selection process, Mordecai actually instructs her to not reveal that she's Jewish. As she goes through the process, she actually does become queen. And afterwards, Mordecai actually finds out that there's a plot to assassinate the king by some of the guards. He then reports this back to Queen Esther that this is going on, and the king promptly has them executed. Now, Mordecai's heroics is recorded, but soon quickly forgotten. The book then introduces a man named Haman, and Haman is the king's right-hand man, second in command of the whole kingdom. And there's actually a law that requires people to bow before him. Well, Mordecai being Jewish, he refuses to bow before Haman, and this makes Haman mad, super mad. And so to the point where he finds out that Mordecai is Jewish, and then goes to the king and basically has the king enact a decree that will exterminate all of the Jewish people because they're not obeying the laws of the land. So here's where we're at. Mordecai finds out about Haman's plot to have the Jewish people go up the way of the dodo. So then he obviously goes to Queen Esther and says, "Hey girlfriend, you need to go talk to the boy, the king, and get this fixed." She says, "I can't do that because there's only one law in this land when it comes to approaching the king, and that's you can't approach the king unsummoned, and if you do, man or woman, it does not matter. You can be killed unless he extends his golden scepter." And see, this is where the most pivotal point, in my opinion, in the whole book of Esther, and it comes in these verses. Esther 4:13-16. He sent back this answer: "Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this?" Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai: "Go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." This is the most pivotal moment in the whole book, and it's a decision of bravery and humility made by a girl who has actually lost everything in her life. She lost her freedom. Her country is ruled by another nation. She lost her family. She has no mother and father. She's an orphan. And she lost her womanhood to be married to a man who of not her own choosing. And she makes a decision. And I believe that she could have gotten out of it. She could have saved herself. No one knew that she was a Jew. She's the queen after all. Who's going to murder the queen? But still she chooses to risk her life for her people because she humbly bowed to God's plan versus her own. So she goes to the king, and luckily he extends his scepter. And all she asks him is, hey, I want to have you and Haman over for dinner. And he's like, okay, that sounds good. So the following day, the king, Haman, and Esther, they have a banquet, and they're having a grand old time. And in the middle of the banquet, the king asks, hey, Queen Esther, what is it that you want? You know, whatever you want, it's yours. And so she says, I just want to have you guys over again for another banquet tomorrow. And he says, done. All right, sounds good. After the banquet, Haman is on cloud 9. But on the way home, he passes by Mordecai. He remembers that Mordecai will not bow before him. It makes him pissed. It makes him mad all over again. And so when he gets home, he actually devises a plan to have Mordecai killed the next day by constructing some gallows in his backyard and asking permission to have Mordecai killed the following day. So the next day, Haman goes and visits the king, asking for permission to have Mordecai killed. But literally, right before that, the king is reminded that there's this guy named Mordecai who saved his life a while back. And so when Haman shows up, the king tells Haman to instead honor this guy by putting a crown on his head and a royal horse for him to ride. And Haman's the one that has to lead him around the city, saying all these great things about him. And so obviously Haman's livid and his plans are thwarted. Queen Esther, Haman, and the king then have their second banquet. And they're having a grand old time. And then again in the middle of it, the king asks, Queen Esther, why are we doing this? Is there anything that you want? And then that's when Queen Esther reveals that she's Jewish. And then says that there's someone that's trying to kill her and all of her people. And the king's like, who is this person? And then she points at Haman and says, it's this guy. The king's pissed. He storms off. And all the while, Haman then goes and starts pleading for his life. He runs towards Esther and asks for his life. But at the same time, the king comes back. It looks like that Haman is attacking the queen. So he has Haman restrained and taken away and then eventually executed even on the very gallows that he created to kill Mordecai. Afterwards, Mordecai is then ascended into the position that Haman had and creates a counter edict to save the Jewish people from the previous edict that had the Jewish people all exterminated. Now, I really like the book of Esther. Even though God is not mentioned a single time in the whole book, you can definitely see his fingerprints all over the place. From Esther becoming queen amongst all the other girls in the land, to her being not killed when she breaks the law and goes in front of the king, and he extends his scepter to her, to Mordecai being in the right place at the right time to warn the king of these people that are trying to assassinate him, and then also at the last minute, him being saved because the king remembers this thing that he did for him before. So you can definitely see God working throughout the book, even though he's not explicitly mentioned. The way that God works in the book of Esther is very much similar to the way that we see God working in our own lives, through the circumstances, through the things that happen in our lives, where it can't be just coincidence that these things happen. Like we don't see fire raining down from heaven anymore. We don't see large bodies of water turning to blood anymore, or stopping a river from moving. We don't see that in our daily lives, but we do see God working in our circumstances, in our situations. And the character of Esther herself is also very relatable. Like when Mordecai went to her and said, hey, you need to go fix this, her first reaction is like, yes, I'm gonna go do it. I'm ready to go. No, it was like, I can't do that. I could die. I don't want to do that. There is that kind of hesitation to do that. And there is a little bit of lack of faith. But then when she understood God's truth, when Mordecai shared with her, it's like, hey, maybe God's placed you in your position for a time such as this. And telling her the truth, like, hey, you know what? Ultimately, God is in control of everything. And if he wants to save the people, he's going to save the people with or without you. And so when she came to that realization, there is that level also of humility that she showed in recognizing, hey, this is God's truth. And even though like I'm scared, even though I may die, like she did believe that there's a possibility that she would still die even doing all this. If I perish, I perish, is what she said. Right? And so even though she had those fears, she still put her trust and faith in God. And I feel like that makes her much more relatable versus some of these other older prophets that just like, I'm just gonna do it. I don't care. I'm gonna go do it, and had no questions whatsoever because they heard audibly from God. Nowhere in Scripture, nowhere in Esther does it actually show Esther hearing distinctly from God, but she knew His truths, and in her obedience, God honored her. God honored her obedience, so much so that there's actually a Jewish holiday to commemorate what she did. It's the Jewish holiday of Purim, which they literally celebrate this story in the Bible, of which God brought salvation to their people from being wiped out. That's all said and good, Ricky. The book of Esther is a great book about God working in circumstances. But what does it look like for me in my life? And I do want to share a story with you guys about a person that I've actually talked about before. I've shared in the past about the president of my old company and how we prayed together and we had good conversations and we saw God working through the prayer. Shortly after that, we actually ended up, both leaving the company and kind of going our separate ways. About a year later after that, after we kind of parted, we met up again and just to chat. And during that lunch that we had, he wanted to share a story with me. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. And so he was a president of another company. And so there was one day he was just working, and all of a sudden one of the employees showed up into his office. And his employee said, hey, you need to fire me. And the president was like, okay, that's weird. Usually employees don't come to me asking to be fired. And so he questioned me. He asked him, like, oh, why do you need to be fired? Or why should I fire you? And the guy says, I'm an alcoholic. I have problems. You need to get rid of me because I'm a bad person. And I'm an alcoholic. It's destroying my family, so on and so forth. And so, the president, he was like, okay, this is interesting. But why? What are you going to do? What are you going to do about this? Like, suppose I do fire you. Well, what are you going to do? And the guy says, well, I'm going to pull myself up by my bootstraps, and I'm going to fix my problem and fix my life. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take it in my own hands. And the president said, well, don't you think that's the reason why you are in the situation that you are right now? Because you've been trying to do everything by yourself, and what happens is you just keep falling back into this alcohol abuse. And the guy says, well, what should I do? What I do then? And so this is when the president, he goes, well, what do you know about God? And the guy took a step back, and it's like, okay, I'm actually an atheist. And in my head, I'm like, yo, what? Red flags are going off. Uh-oh, what did you just do? Are you going to create this work environment of hostility? And the guy continues to go on. But it's funny that you mention that, because literally the day before, I was at Starbucks trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do. How am I going to figure out my life from getting out of this alcohol addiction? And what he noticed, like across the room, the guy saw this man with a book. And he didn't know why, but he felt compelled to go and talk to that guy. So he got up and he talked to that guy, and he asked him, hey, I noticed you have a book there. Are you a pastor? And in my mind, I was like, whoa, why did he even come? We even think about that. And the guy looks up to the alcoholic, and he says, well, actually, I am. And they start having this conversation and discussion. And the man finds out that the pastor was actually an alcoholic addict before in the past as well. And so they have a really good conversation and just talk about it. And he's like, maybe this is a sign. Okay, like literally back to back, he has these conversations about the faith, about Christianity. And so, like from this pastor guy, and then obviously, his own boss comes and talks to him about it as well. And so the president, after hearing this, said, "Hey, you know what? How about you go to your Alcoholic Anonymous program, and just take some time off, and don't worry about getting fired. Your job will be safe. You can have my word on it, and you'll be fine." And so he goes off, and he actually checks himself into Alcoholics Anonymous AA, and does that thing for like a week or so. But the problem is, all the while, he still has a wife and kids at home. And so the president, he goes and visits the wife and the kids and says, "Hey, I know it's kind of crazy, and the wife is she looks kind of frazzled, and like, what's going on? All of a sudden, her husband's gone and leaving her with the kids, and she's all taking it by herself." And the president goes to her and visits her and says, "Hey, how? I know that things are kind of crazy. Your husband's gone, and you're left to take care of the kids by yourself. There are church programs that can help you out during this time." And she's like, "No, I don't need that. I don't need any of that stuff." Okay, and so she kind of just waves him off and tells the president to just leave. And so he goes home, and he actually tells the president tells his wife about it, and her response is like, "No, we need to help this girl. We need to help this lady because she can't do it by herself." So she creates a care calendar and kind of sets up meal plans and groceries and all these things, and even gets one person even signs up to give her a babysitter, her own babysitter that she normally uses to help her take care of her kids while she does her stuff, and she's gonna just take care of her own kids by herself. And so they just totally bless her every single day of the week, every single day that her husband is gone. And after everything's all said and done, about like a week later, the president visits her again, and she's like, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this for me?" And he says, "We do this because, hey, let me just tell you the gospel. Let me tell you about this man named Jesus. And because we know that he loved us so much and gave up so much and sacrificed so much for us, we are called to love and care for people the exact same way. And this is why we're doing it. This is why we're doing it for you." And so she's able to hear the gospel every single day, not through words, but through the actions of these people. And that's really beautiful. So after all is said and done, her husband comes back. He comes back from Alcoholics Anonymous, and at this time he's become a Christian. He's like a believer now. He accepts Christ, and it's really awesome. And so the president says, "Hey, I have a men's Bible study that I go to each week. So I would like you to come and share your testimony." And he's like, "Sure, I can do that." So he goes to this men's group, and he shares his testimony. He was crying, he was weeping. It's great and glorious. It's just seeing God work through this man's life. And then all of a sudden, one of the men at the group, not the alcoholic or the president, one of the other men says, "Hey, thanks for sharing. I just want to let you know that I have a very similar problem with my own son, and he's an addict. He's a drug addict. And it's encouraging to hear your story of seeing how God redeemed you from your life." And the person who went to AA started asking him, about his son. And he kind of shares about him, but then he starts asking more specific questions about him, like what does he look like, what does he do, all these things. And as the man shares, the guy who went to AA, he said, "I met that guy. I want to let you know that I know you don't know where your son is right now. You don't know if he's dead or alive. But I want to let you know that he is alive because I saw him. I saw him at the AA meeting, and I want to let you know that he's alive. You know, of all the people in the whole city, in the whole world that could have told him that, there's very few people that could have told him and assured him that his son is doing okay. There's very few people. And yet, God brought this man to this other man to let him know, hey, everything's okay. And it's this beautiful picture. And you know, if you want to call it coincidence, you can call it coincidence. But to me, you can't. The circumstances are too nicely put together to say that for anyone to say that it was just pure coincidence. So in this story, the president company, he took a risk by bringing up things of the faith in the workplace, and it could be risky. It could make for awkward situations at the company. It could make for people getting upset with each other when you bring up things of faith. But he did. He took a risk, and I think through that you could see God glorified. You could see people being blessed through that. You could see miracles happen. Maybe not in the ray of fire raining down from heaven kind of way, but you do see God work, and that's a really beautiful thing that he gets to be a part of that, and he gets to be a part of that story. That being said, we are all very privileged. Economically, academically, socially, whatever. We are very privileged people in Lighthouse. It's true. And I want to ask you, what are you willing to risk in order to see God do great things, right? Because the truth is, just like Peter in the boat, if you want to walk on water, and if you want to see God do miracles through you, you have to get out of the boat, and that requires some risk. So, thank you guys for listening. I hope you have a good discussion. Here's some questions for you guys for the discussion in your small group. Do you feel like it's hard to see God working right now? Do you believe that he still is? What positions, blessings, gifts do you think that God has given you uniquely? Would you be willing to risk your privilege in order to accomplish God's purpose? Do you think that God may be calling you to take risks for his purpose in your life right now?
Our announcement for today is that on December 18th and 20th, we won't be having Lighthouse. But instead, we'll be having a church-wide Christmas celebration. So make sure you and your whole family are able to join us.